Good morning. It's Tuesday, June 14th. It is 9 a.m. and we're here for our county commissioner meeting in the chamber, and we have a full slate of commissioners, the administrator, and the clerk of the board. So at this time, I'll call the meeting to order. If you'd please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. All right, the first item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from May 17th and May 24th. Is there any additions, corrections, or
No.
Nope. Okay. With that, we'll move down to office business. I believe we have two vouchers.
We do. Move for approval of fund expenditures in the total amount of $481,672.46 as presented, and note that it has been reviewed and signed by two representatives of the auditor's office and the county administrator.
Second.
There's been a motion and a second to approve the fund expenditures. All in favor say aye.
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 Move for approval of salary clearing payroll and emergency management payroll in the total amount of $1,015,344.53 as presented, and note that it has been reviewed and signed by two representatives of the auditor's office.
Second.
There's been a motion and a second for the salary clearing payroll and emergency management payroll. All in favor say aye.
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 Aye. With that, we'll move down to the consent agenda. I believe we have two items on the consent agenda today.
Move for approval of consent agenda items 1 and 2 as presented.
Second with discussion on item 2.
We have a motion and a second for consented items 1 and 2 with discussion on item 2. Proceed, Commissioner Peck.
So, Mr. Johnson, we, as a board, decided more than a year ago, I think, that we're going to sell the Wilson House, and we had some discussions about it. We ended up getting an appraisal to make sure we were selling it at a reasonable price, and now we're being asked to extend the lease into the middle of the winter when interest rates will be higher and values will be down and market activity will be suppressed. Why are we doing that and not just selling this, which is what we agreed to do more than a year ago?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Peck. The reason for the extension is to accommodate the fact that we won't have it sold by June 30th is when the current lease term expires. We extended it to give us an opportunity to really resolve just one question regarding the special use permit that Lord's is operating the Wilson House under. It's located in a place of the city that is zoned solely for residential purposes. That house many, many years ago was a residence. And since Lord's has been operating it as a non-residential business center, then it's required that special use permit from the city. And we were just making sure that the terms of that conditional use permit can continue with the property going forward. Lord's has expressed an interest in purchasing it. They have followed it pretty closely in terms of wanting the county to go ahead and pursue sales. I think we're in a position now, we're ready to do that, should have that done. I am hopeful by the end of the summer. That would mean that if there's a purchaser that is not Lord's, they would take that property subject to the terms of that lease going through the end of December. But that's not a particularly unusual circumstance. But I think we've gotten the questions answered that we need to and are ready to move forward with the sale. It's just a timing issue in terms of not having it done by June 30th.
So you'll confirm with the city that the CUP either extinguishes with the sale or is attached to the property and conveys with the sale?
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
So we have a motion and a second for the 2 consent agenda items. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. That moves us down to Commissioner Administrator updates. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Spent some time this past week in a Hanford Communities Administrative Board meeting with counterparts in the region. Focus of most of that meeting was on the budget for the Administrative Board. That's going to actually see a decrease this year, and so that's a positive step, but just update on what's going on with the Hanford Communities organization. Also participated in the Franklin County VSP, Voluntary Stewardship Program. They've met most of their targets for the past couple of years, and we received an update on some of the programs and projects that they've been working on and things that they plan on doing for the next couple of years. And also participated in a strategy session with the Washington Association of Building Officials. They manage a educational program to bring certification to building officials throughout the state. They were looking for some insight and help about what kind of skills building officials need to address a couple of things going on in the industry. One, the lack of qualified applicants for building officials across the state, and just the changing nature of construction and the requisite skills that are needed for cities and counties to have effective code administration in their organizations. That's the major 3 topics. Thank you.
Commissioner Pack.
Let's see, this week had the House Bill 1152 committee meeting, which is the rebuild, restructure of the Benton Franklin Health District in compliance with House Bill 1152. I guess it's now law. Meeting with Benton Franklin Council of Governments Executive Director and staff for possible conclusion or elimination of a couple of loan funds that have been part of the Council of Governments since the early 90s, but no longer appear viable, and there are other similar options available in the community. Attended the Pasco Chamber lunch yesterday. I saw Commissioner Mullen there as well. Dr. Franklin from WSU gave a presentation on East Pasco history, which was more than interesting. Met with 3 different constituents and with the Army Corps of Engineer representative regarding the McNary Pool master plan update and inputs to that plan, citizen inputs, not county. And also assisted 2 constituents with the McNary Pool shoreline plan, which is a different plan. It's the one that regulates shoreline usage, real estate permits for structures on the core shoreline, and also boat docks, which are coming due for renewal in many cases. Thanks.
Commissioner Mullen.
So attended the Chamber of Commerce meeting yesterday. Also met with Colville Tribe this morning along with Keith Johnson. They'll be meeting with the other 2 commissioners later today. Also had the Ben Franklin Transit meeting and discussion on the hiring of a new manager, plus the 0.01% tax debate that we've been having. And following along with the Move Ahead Washington plan, the 2 stipulations in this plan are that everyone that's 18 and under will ride for free, and the other stipulation is that reduction of the sales tax, and that's where the debacle has been created as far as the legality if we lose the funding, if we do reduce the 0.01%. The thing about the Move Ahead Washington plan is that it could be as much as $76 million over the next 16 years. If we don't receive this funding or don't qualify or don't meet those two requirements, it doesn't save us any money. They simply give the money away to a different county. And it makes it very, I would say, difficult. I mean, as far as questioning the reduction of the tax, if that would disqualify us from the funding. Well, it's kind of like there's no winner. I mean, the way it was, if we did get the legal advice and we're able to reduce the tax and without losing the funding, they would simply legislate it next year to where it would probably reverse it. So it's kind of you want to save the money as far as the money to the taxpayers, but at the same time you would be disqualifying yourself from that funding, which in my opinion isn't right, because it's the taxpayers' money. We shouldn't, they took that money from the taxpayer. Now they're giving us the requirements of what we have to do to get our own money back. I'm looking forward to a new manager that could possibly go into Ben Franklin Transit and be able to provide a better service at a lower cost, because I think there's a lot of areas where with strategic planning that we could actually provide a better service without spending as much money as what they are. Part of the argument was that going forward that Ben Franklin Transit will be broke in a few years. Well, if you have a budget of over $50 million and you know you're going broke, that's not a very good plan. I think I would step back, take a look, and reevaluate all the expenses and the routes and why we have so many empty buses. Would be my goal would be to see a better service at a much lower cost. Anyways, that's my report for this week. Thank you.
Thank you. So I had the Veterans quarterly meeting, and we're still waiting for a VSO. We're supposed to be working together by county for a VSO, Veteran Service Officer, to help our veterans apply and get the state and federal monies that they're entitled to. We still haven't got one hired. And I sort of made a statement there that we need to get going on this, and I made a statement that maybe Franklin County needs to look at hiring a part-time or a full-time VSO officer ourselves. If this is taking so long, and they're telling me that the veterans are lined up outside the office at Kennewick, that this should be a priority and we should be getting it done. And I questioned Kyle Sullivan on it, and he's working with our attorneys trying to get this thing hammered out. It's something that needs to be done. We have veterans that are in need, and if they don't fill out their paperwork right the first time, they don't get a second chance. So it needs to be done. We need a VSO officer. I also talked to a veteran who is completely disabled, that said hiring a VSO officer isn't going to solve the problem. We need a VSO officer that's in tune, and they said they would help, in making sure that this happened, that we're in tune to the process so that we can get our veterans the help that they need. So I'm working with that person also. Also, the Ben Franklin Transit. There seems to be a discrepancy here on taxing authority and tax rate. The taxing authority is the authority for us to tax our citizens for Ben Franklin Transit. Has nothing in there about the tax rate. They sent a letter off to our AG asking for clarity. They said there's no way they could answer this, and therefore they're not going to try. And so this is what we got from our AG here in the state, that they won't give us clarity on this. And our attorney seems to think that it does apply to tax rate when it specifically talks about tax authority, if we were to lower it 0.01%. The good news is I'm getting emails and conversations with Ben Franklin Transit employees, and they too see the waste. And they say we can sharpen up this process and make it a lot more effective and efficient. I've been proclaiming the downsizing of these big diesel pushers running around Pasco, because that's where I see a lot of the bus service as I'm coming in for parts and stuff and moving around Pasco, seeing these buses and constantly always viewing to see how many people are on a bus. The most I've seen is 3. Sometimes I only see, I'm not counting the driver. Most times I only see 1 or 2. And so I'm getting people reaching out to me from Ben Franklin Transit about the fact that, yes, we need to downsize these buses, be more effective, efficient, especially with fuel costs the way they are. More economic engines. Talked to the guy over there that's going to be retiring from the service manager shop there, and he said that they have experienced and tried these out before. The smaller buses with the smaller wheels will be a rougher ride. And I said, then why don't we get smaller buses with bigger wheels so that we have a smoother ride, or the suspension of the bus system. But here's the problem with Ben Franklin Transit is we are being given this carrot hanging in front of us, and we've got to follow the path of the direction that the feds and the state want us to go in order to get those funds. We have to get electrical buses. The one electrical bus we got right now is just a monument over there, sitting there. It doesn't get used anymore. They're telling us by 2030, I think it is, we've got to be all electrical. And I said, where is the good sense in this when they're also talking about breaching the Snake River dams? And now we have Murray and Inslee with a plan of breaching these dams. Where's the energy going to come from for these electrical buses? They're setting us up for a fall. And I think that we, as a community, need to be looking out for Ben Franklin Transit and the movement of the people in an efficient and effective way and take a hold of the reins ourselves. This money they're dangling is only going to take us further into debt, and it will bankrupt Ben Franklin Transit if we keep allowing them to push us the direction we don't need to go. So with that, the only 2 meetings I had, but Ben Franklin Transit is taking up a lot of my time right now. We do have a new GM coming in. I'm very anxious to work with this individual because they were down at Portland, TriMet. They've already experienced the drug addiction problems on these buses and the lawsuits from needles, people sitting on the needles, people smoking drugs on the bus. They got to shut the bus down. They got to air it out. And honestly, she said she just wants to get away from that situation. And I asked her, I said, how are you going to be proactive so that doesn't happen here? And her answer was really well done. She said, I'll make it uncomfortable for them to use our bus. And that's what we're going to have to do, is to keep them off the bus so we can move the people around in a safe, effective manner. We're going to have to make it uncomfortable for them to get on the bus. So with that, I think that Ben Franklin Transit is on the move in the right direction with this new GM, with the attitude of the directors. I think that we can make Ben Franklin Transit more effective and efficient and less costly to the people here in the community. So with that, we'll move down to public comment. Is there anybody for public comment? Anybody on the phone, Keith?
No.
Yeah, one more thing I would like to add is at the end of the agenda, instead of public comment before the administration office business, I'd like to move the public comment to after the administration office business in case anybody wanted to speak of behavioral health update, if that's okay. As a chairman, I have that authority to move that. I would like to move that to after the to see if anybody had public comment on that. So with that, we'll move down to the next item on the agenda is the hire deputy treasurer, cashier specialist at step 3. Eric?
Good morning, Commissioners. I bring this request on behalf of the Treasurer's Office. They've identified a candidate to fill their vacant position, the Deputy Treasurer, Financial Specialist Cashier position. The Treasurer is requesting this individual be brought in at a Step 3 in recognition of that they have a certificate in business administration, as well as experience as a paralegal, which the Treasurer believes will be an asset with excise-related work. Not much to add beyond what's in the package, but happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Questions?
I have no questions.
Eric, the package said that this application was submitted on May 27th with an intended start date of June 14th, which is today. Is this person already hired, or we've just extended an offer?
We've their onboarding is scheduled for today. The job offer that was extended to them was at the Step 1 starting salary, but acknowledged that the Treasurer will be bringing this step exception request before the board today. So they are starting today at Step 1, and should this be approved, then the salary will be effective today.
Okay, let's unpack that in reverse order. The start date in the package said June 14th, today. They've been offered a position at Step 1. They've accepted the position at Step 1, and they start today.
Correct.
Okay. There was apparently, I think the package uses the word identical request a year ago for the same step entry.
Correct.
That's in the package. So was that for an identical position and grade and responsibility?
Yes, that was the exact same position that was filled September of last year.
Okay, and so there's multiple positions in this office that are identical?
Correct.
Okay, and the one last year where they were brought in at Step 3 was based on experience and credentials?
Yeah, it was different experience and credentials. Education was one of those components, but I believe the exception request last fall identified extensive cashier experience as one of the primary reasons for that request last time, but experience and education, yes, both times.
Okay, and same this time, but it's more focused on experience than education?
So in the package where I wrote that she has a certificate in business administration as well as paralegal experience, that was directly taken from the email that the Treasurer sent to me. So those are the reasons that they're citing.
Okay, and as I recall from the package, the offer was extended with a commitment to at least request a Step 3,
Correct.
but the applicant accepted the position at a Step 1?
That is correct.
Okay. And so, from an HR perspective, are we not in the market with a Step 1 compensation? What would the HR argument be for spending more money for someone who has accepted the position at a grade 1?
I mean, typically, so by virtue of county policy, that's what requires someone to come in at Step 1, and only the board can approve an exception. So, but from an HR standpoint, bringing somebody in a higher salary range can be an effective recruiting tool to bring somebody in. If while the salary range might be competitive at the macro level, if somebody is in one of those positions in another entity and might require a different step entry to want to come bring their talents to Franklin County, the step exception process is one way that we as an entity have to attract talent.
But we attracted this person, and they accepted it as a Step 1. That's really kind of the part I'm trying to sort out. I realize there's not a huge difference between a Step 1 and a Step 3. And without being too direct about it, I'm trying to get a sense of whether or not this position was accepted on the premise of a promise of trying to get a Step 3 when it had been successful in the past.
Perhaps that might be a question. I think the treasurer's back there and can maybe speak to what was the reason for the request and whatnot. But yeah, no, as far as what like I said, last year, this request today is consistent with the one from September of last year, but
Yeah, and I'd be careful about comparing those too much because, as you've already said, the circumstances and qualifications were not really identical. A similar scenario, but different qualifications. So I guess to even put a finer point and make it more precise, don't we normally offer positions at a particular grade and step? And if we want to bring them in at a higher step, we resolve that before we actually give them the job and have them starting. I mean, literally, the person has already started working for us.
I mean, typically, yes. Sometimes it just is a matter of administrative process when we're able to get something on the board's agenda. I mean, as you can see, if I happen to get the PAF and the request on a Wednesday, which is after the board's deadline to submit things, it could
So
be
you
a
got
matter
it
of
last
timing.
Wednesday?
No, I'm speaking in generalities. With regard to this specific one, I believe I submitted this on 5/31, so it was well in advance. I don't set the hire date, that the department does, so, again, that might be a better question for the department, but I submit them
Yeah.
as I am asked to do so.
Okay, just to be clear, I'm not drilling down on this particular one as much as I am policy and practice and the precedent that we create, right? We've had a bunch of these lately, and this one steps out of even the norm of what we've done lately. It almost says, just go ahead and hire the person, and we'll get you the step later, but that's enough, thank you.
Okay.
Commissioner Mullen, any questions?
No, I just was wondering why, the same question that Mr. Peck had, that if they accepted the job at that step, then it seems like the order's been reversed. But, no.
Yeah. And I'd be happy to hear from the treasurer if there's anything that you think that I'm missing that I should know.
So I'm not the treasurer, but just.
Well, the treasurer's representative will
Yeah.
work too.
So there's a couple things. There's two things that goes into this. We try to keep it where it's equitable with the position that we brought in September. Part of it is, yes, this is accepted at step one. That's how we presented the position. That's how we hired. But we know what the market out there is. This is literally the most basic position you could get in the courthouse. And I understand that step one is policy and practice, and that's what we could legally go or per policy go and advertise. But I also understand as soon as somebody gets that job at step one, if we don't do our due diligence on our end when the person's negotiating at least in good faith, try to give them a higher step, that 6 months, 12 months down the road, this person is going to look at their counterpart that has now 6 more months of experience than they will have. Whether it's a year down the road or 5 years down the road, that counterpart is only going to have 6 months more experience. They're always going to be 3 steps higher. So that's not going to keep it as equitable as we would like it across the board. It's harder to keep that equal culture in the office. But also, again, this is a grade 12 position. The difference is $17 and something versus $20 and something. I know that you guys are out there and see what the job market is. If we hire somebody at that step one, $17 an hour, it's a good way to get in the door. It's a courthouse job, it's a government job, but as soon as a step or a grade 13 or a grade 14 opens up, we're gonna have that person look elsewhere. They already might, but now, in our opinion, is that we're doing everything we can in good faith to get that person equitable with their counterpart and kind of keep them a little bit more competitive with other positions to the extent that we can. It kind of creates that culture of, hey, we want to be here, we want to work in this office is willing to fight for us, our salaries, and so that's really where we're going for here.
Okay, just one quick question then. Why didn't we get this resolved before we hired the person?
So I would love to, and that was kind of our goal initially, but so the position that we lost the person in was beginning in May, that the person's resolving. So it kind of turned out to be where the longer we put this off, the start date would be now 2 weeks from now. If we waited till today to resolve it, the person had a prior job, now they're starting working at the end of June. We already have quite a bit of workload. We didn't have a person in the office for now a month and a half because the position was open. So this kind of delays the process. And so our hope was to kind of expedite it and get this started. I mean, to be quite honest, June 14 is already a lot further along than what we wanted a person to start working.
So the person that previously was filling this position left 1st of May? you said?
Somewhere in May. I don't know the exact date. I don't recall exactly.
Her start date in my office was May 7th.
Okay, so the position became vacant on May 7th,
Correct.
and it was 3 weeks to get a request into HR.
No, well.
It got in the
no-
27th.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of pieces to go into. We opened the position, first round of candidates. We looked through it, we reviewed it. In our opinion, there wasn't anybody that, we actually brought in a person, but we didn't think would fit. The qualifications for grade 12 are, it's hard to get applicants for grade 12 in this job market.
Sure.
And so the applicants that we got, we didn't think would fit the work. We reopened it, that kind of delayed it again, so then we got a second round of applicants, and then this person came along, and, you know, we tried to do, we had the interview process, and then by the time all this came around, by the time we offered her the job, by the time she worked it out with her prior employer, because she didn't want to just leave the prior employer without giving them the, you know, for 2 weeks, and then they asked her to stay a couple extra days, which we thought was fair, and then the whole process, I mean, it takes time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, if there's no more discussion, I'd entertain a motion.
I'll make the motion that we hire the deputy treasurer cashier specialist at step 3.
I'll
My
second.
understanding is that the person is already hired, so if I may, I take it your motion is to elevate the person from a step 1 to a step 3. We've already hired them, they're already on the job. Taking that as a motion, I would second.
Yes, that was the intent, was to hire at the step 3.
So we have a motion and a second to take the deputy treasurer, cashier financial specialist from a step 1 to a step 3. All in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Okay, next, Eric, we have the approval of hire corrections deputy at step 3.
Yeah, so the next 2 requests I have are on behalf of the sheriff, both to hire a corrections deputy at both of them at step 3. Both are lateral candidates that come with Washington State Department of Corrections experience. The step 3 entry is consistent with every other lateral entry that the sheriff has brought in. And then similarly, with the benefit of bringing in lateral entry DOC personnel, there's a a budget savings to the county where they don't have to go to the Washington State Criminal Justice Training Commission for their training and whatnot. So there's a direct budget savings as a result of those hires that the sheriff made. But I'm happy to answer any questions on the first one and or second one.
Questions?
I don't see the sheriff here this morning, that's unusual. It says there are several positions open, vacant positions. Are they all same grade? Are they,
Correct. So all the current openings in corrections are all the corrections deputy positions. So they're all the same pay grade.
same grade, and they'd all be step 1 entry level?
Correct. Per policy, yes.
Okay, there may be additional questions, but I'll move for approval of the hire corrections deputy at step 3 request as presented by the sheriff, and this is for the candidate last name, Murillo, looks like.
Do we want to do them separately or just do them both together? Separately. I'll second it for Marino.
There's been a motion and a second for the approval of the hire of corrections deputy at step 3. Discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
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 And Eric, on this next one, again, all these several positions are all step 1 coming in.
Correct, yes.
Okay, the reason I ask is if these positions were already at the same grade but pre-approved to say a step 3 or step 5, then we would just be displacing one position with another. That's all I'm doing, is making sure that we're not.
So I think per prior conversations with the board, so the fiscal impact represented reflects what so per policy, where if somebody say a step 6 and they depart, per policy, they get brought in as step 7. So that's what the fiscal impact represents, is what the policy would require, which is a step 1 entry. I don't necessarily track which what the position was budgeted at or what step, because
There's several open positions,
Right.
and once they're open, whether they're newly created or someone is vacated, they're set at a particular grade, and the person that comes in at that grade in a step one,
Yes.
unless the board approves a higher entry level.
Correct.
The reason I was asking is because if there were somebody going out, and this person could be hired under that position at an already elevated grade, we would be displacing. It's, without getting into the weeds too much, you'd be creating additional step authority. So, anyway.
So Eric, we've got another approval of a higher corrections deputy at step 3.
Yes.
Is there a motion?
Move to approve the higher corrections deputy request from the sheriff's office at a step 3 as presented. The last name for the candidate is Small.
Second.
There's been a motion and a second to approve the higher corrections deputy at a step 3, last name Small. All in favor, say aye.
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 All right.
Okay, Eric takes us down to the approval of the hire of HR Generalist 1 at step 2.
Yeah, so this request is for my own office, so I've conditionally offered an employee in the sheriff's office, she's an existing sheriff support specialist, to start in my office tomorrow to fill my vacant HR Generalist 1 position. She comes to the HR office with over 15 years of experience at the county, as well as direct experience in working on issues such as FMLA, Washington State paid family leave, workers' comp duties that she'll be performing in the HR department. Per county policy, when an employee is promoted to a higher pay grade, they move to the step that affords them an increase. In this case, she's a grade 13, step 7. And then would, if she was a non-bargaining employee, would move to a grade 16, step 2, and I wouldn't have to bring this request before you today. But because the union that she is in, they haven't settled their collective bargaining agreement yet, so technically, the step that would afford her an increase is a grade 16, step 1, until that contract settles probably in the next 2 to 3 weeks. So my request today is to grant this exception to essentially move her to the step she would have otherwise already went to if that contract had been settled.
Questions?
What's the certainty that the contract will in fact be settled? It's subject to change until it's settled, right?
Correct. So, I mean, obviously, the board is final signature authority, which that's not come before you all yet. We've reached tentative agreement on the contract. It's gone through the legal review process, and the union just ratified it last night. So it's a matter of collecting signatures at this point and then submitting it to the board probably in the next couple of weeks for final approval.
Okay. The union ratification was not in the package. Now I know why. It was just last night.
Yeah.
Respectfully, that would have been a good piece of information to provide up front, because that was my concern, is why not wait until it's ratified so that we don't create something out of normal policy. So,
Yeah, like I
Thank
said, I brought it simply just because there's only 2 of us in HR at the moment, so that allows me to get somebody in quicker and begin getting us back to that bandwidth.
so you're short-staffed, so I get the urgency. It was the ratification piece that I didn't know, and that makes all the difference. Thank you.
So Eric, what's the amount of employees in HR to the employees of the courthouse? There's an equation there that I've heard over at Ben Franklin Transit that it is customarily 1 per 100. Is that?
I mean, that's typically an industry standard. It can vary based on kind of what the needs of an organization are, but at the kind of the higher macro level, that's typically the figure that gets thrown out there. Certainly it can vary by state and the industry as well, depending on regulations and other things of that matter.
How many employees do we have in the courthouse?
We're, I think, about 275 full-time employees, and when you factor in part-time employees, it's just slightly over 300.
And how many will this put in your office?
I'm budgeted for 4 positions for the year.
Okay. Thank you.
You're budgeted for 4, or this is gonna bring you to a total of 3?
This will bring me to 3. So I have interviews scheduled in 2 weeks' time for my final position to backfill, essentially backfilling me when I was promoted. So.
I'm presuming that ratios for HR people to employees varies widely if it's a 2,000 employee organization or a 200-employee organization. There are certain basic baseline functions you have to provide, and so I would think the ratio would be higher in a small organization like ours. So 3, 4 doesn't seem unreasonable to me.
If we're comparing it to Ben Franklin Transit, I think they have within 10 employees of what the county has. But
I'm not familiar with Ben Franklin Transit, other than I know that they do a lot of contracting for HR services, so I do know that, because I get reached out to all the time from different vendors that they contract with doing, compensation analysis work or benefits analysis work. Vendors that we don't contract with, we do that work in-house.
move for approval to hire the human resource generalist at step 2. Last name is Wilder.
Second.
Been a motion and a second for the approval of the HR Generalist 1 at step 2, last name Wilder. All in favor, say aye.
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 Thank you.
Thank you. So with that, we'll move down to approval of the .09 Economic Development Fund expenditures for economic development projects, Resolution 2022-127.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'll speak to that if that's all right with you.
Yes.
Every year, as you know, we go through a process of seeking applications for use of our .09 fund. It's specifically set aside as a revenue stream for economic development in rural counties. There was some legislation to consider the end date that has been brought up in several of the last few sessions. That did not pass, but it doesn't really affect Franklin County that directly. We still have another few years of the .09 fund coming in for our county. We received, the committee is made up of representatives of the port, the county, the cities, and they meet to consider applications. We received 2 applications, both of which have been forwarded to this commission for final disposition and hopefully approval. One is for a combined request from the city of Pasco and the port of Pasco related to the sanitary sewer system at the Ryman complex, largely in anticipation of Dairy Gold and other major developments going on out there. And then the second one was somewhat of a routine request. It's gone up a little bit in the dollar amount, but it's a request from Tridec to fund recruiting efforts for businesses into our community that they have found to be very helpful to have those personnel available and that software, lead development software that they use. So I see that Randy Hayden, the executive director of the port, is here. Randy, I don't know if you'd care to speak or include anything more than what's in our background information, but invite you to the microphone to make a brief statement, if you would, please.
Yeah, Randy Hayden with the Port of Pasco. Thanks. Always good to be in front of the commission. Appreciate Keith's work on behalf of the 09 committee. It's always been a very collegial group to get together, and I think we've always selected really good projects for our county and economic development. Also appreciate the fact, as Keith mentioned, that the state has dedicated this portion of their sales tax revenue to come back to rural counties to promote economic development. So it's been a very good deal for those counties like Franklin County that fits that criteria. So really I'll speak to the Port City joint request this year for the sanitary sewer extra $1 million. It's really a result of inflating construction costs. We had initially gone into the infrastructure that we're providing for Dairy Gold and the rest of the Ryman Center at $20 million. Our latest estimates now are that's up to $26 million. So along with this $1 million from the county, we're also cobbling together additional funds from the port. And then our TIF, we're looking at that to see if we can find additional ways to use that to get that $6 million shortfall. And that $20 million, just so you know, already came in at a high level with a high contingency, and we've just blown past that with the price increases. So appreciate your consideration of this request this year to help us fill that shortfall.
Thank you.
Certainly.
We
answer
had a
the question,
meeting,
Mayor.
at our meeting last week, we had Mr. Zabel here, and I thought we'd already passed this.
That was a little bit of a different twist. Those were funds that had already been allocated from .09 funds that were initially allocated for the purpose of design, and the city was requesting that we reallocate that to include those funds for actual construction. The design work had been completed, but that would be going toward additional construction work. This is, in essence, related to that, only in the sense that it's part of the same overall project of the development at the Dairy Gold and Ryman Complex, but it's a different function. So this is in addition to those that had already been allocated.
So it's
Yeah.
an increase in the cost of completing the task.
Well, the
Because-
.09 funds, let me be clear, are only a small portion of the total cost of the
Exactly.
project. But this is designed to help them alleviate some of those costs.
Yeah, the work last week too that was for the gray water facility. This is sanitary sewer, which are different systems and actually different projects even. So the only connection between the two is that they're both .09 funds. Last week it was funds previously approved, and then this week this is a new request out of the current funds that we have in the .09, and it almost makes a person wonder if there's a point at which you just say, we're going to hold off for a year and build this thing, but who knows what the economy's going to do, and the Fed's raising rates, and everybody knows all about that, so I won't get into it, but there's a point at which you wonder, where is that line?
So the request is for a grant request for $1 million and the public $4 million. And that $4 million, where does that come from?
That's the city's responsibility, that they will, I'm sure, be looking to other grant or other programs, but that will be the responsibility of Randy, am I saying that correctly? Maybe that's the ports piece of it, or is it a combined?
That's the ports piece.
All right,
Okay.
thank you.
Move for approval of Resolution 2022-127 as presented in the matter of the .09 Economic Development Fund expenditures for economic development projects on behalf of Port of Pasco.
Second.
There's been a motion and a second for the approval of Resolution 2022-127. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
So that moves us down to Keith. We're going to go to Administration Office Business, the behavioral health update.
Yes, thank you. We have received applications for all of the available positions of the Benton Franklin Behavioral Health Advisory Committee. In the areas of mental health practitioners, substance use disorder practitioners, lived experience, and general public, we have received multiple applications in those slots. And so I just wanted to the purpose of my request for an executive session was to talk about some of those individuals and get an idea from the board of how you want to approach, whether it's an interview process or some other process for making a determination of who you want to fill those vacancies on the advisory committee. We'd like to have that done before the end of the month so that they can start meeting with the appointees from Benton County and begin making recommendations of how to manage the funds that have been, we'll start collecting. So I kind of leave that open to your discretion of how you want to proceed at the moment, but I would request an executive session to discuss those names in detail before we discuss those publicly.
Any comments, commissioners?
Seems there's a few ways this could be done. Obviously, one would be to give us the copies of the applications in advance and then just schedule an executive session. We'll have the benefit of pre-reading those. but I'm also certainly open to having an executive session today if you want to discuss that further. I guess I anticipated that's how we would do it, but it doesn't have to be done that way, and we could even have a discussion in executive session, go through each of the candidates and make a decision in open session following that if we chose. I'll do it whichever way the group wants to go.
I would like to see the copies of the applicants beforehand.
Okay. I believe all of you received an email with the, just the applicant names. It didn't have their background
Right.
information on it. So we will put that together and send that to you. And then maybe with the thing to do is, rather than have an executive session today, is we'll schedule that for next week and give you time to review all of those. And incidentally, since I sent you that list of names, I've received 2 additional applications, so those need to be considered in there. So we'll make sure that you have those as well.
Is there a closing time for these?
We didn't set an established closing date. I mean, we're asking for them by the end of May, most of which we had. But like I said, in the last week, I received 2 additional
Okay.
applications.
All righty. So is there any other questions for Keith? Okay, with that, we'll move down to,
Seems to me that the board ought to select a date by which they're going to be closed so that Mr. Johnson has some certainty in which applications and packages he sends to us. We've already extended a couple of weeks beyond what we originally said, which was the end of May. So frankly, I'd be comfortable saying that we cut it off with close of business today, and that gives us the balance of the week to go through all of those in an executive session next Tuesday. We can discuss them, and then we can have open session selections.
Sounds good to me.
Otherwise, we continue to receive applications and be getting them next Monday, and then do we include that for Tuesday? And so I'd say
no,
cut them
there
off, close the business today.
There needs to be a deadline.
Commissioner Mullen has agreed, so
I'm good with that.
close it at the end of business hours today. So with that, we'll move down to public comment. Anybody for public comment? Anybody on the phone, Keith?
No.
Good morning, Commissioners. With the growth that we have here in Franklin County, just would encourage you to be very aware of the needs for transportation in our roads and what's happening with Randy being here from the port this morning and working on what they've got going. I'm working with a group of developers that we're trying to put an additional road just on the north side of Pasco to connect Glade Road over to Burns Road, and there's just a lot of lifting that needs to happen in Franklin County with all the development and growth that we're having, and we encourage you to be involved and engaged in that process. Thank you.
Any other public comment? Anybody on the phone? Nope.
No.
Seeing no other public comment, we will not have a special session to evaluate today. So if there's no other, we do have a bi-county, I see we have a bi-county meeting coming up on the 27th, 10 a.m. And a night meeting on the 28th. All righty. With that, is there any other business for the good of the county? Hearing none, this meeting is